Congress is set to be briefed on UFOs. Israelis and Palestinians agree to a ceasefire. And Rudy Giuliani's son runs for governor of New York. That and more on this week's headline. Welcome to America Uncovered. I'm Chris Chappell. With all the doom and gloom going on in the world, I figured we should lighten the mood with our first story. So, let's talk about abortion. The Supreme Court agreed to take on a case about whether states can ban abortions before a fetus can survive outside the womb. Mississippi wants to ban abortions after 15 weeks of pregnancy, but is not asking to overturn Roe v. Wade. Meanwhile, pro-choice advocates say this is a clear threat to abortion rights. And listen, I know abortion is a divisive issue. Conservatives believe life begins at conception, while liberals say you haven't really lived until you've tried sriracha on a hot dog. The Supreme Court is taking up another case involving something many people hold precious and debate about carrying: guns. The Supreme Court will hear a challenge backed by the NRA over New York State's restrictions on carrying concealed guns in public. The fear that people nationwide will be allowed to start packing heat has led to a renewed push from the left to start packing the court, which of course just makes the right want to buy guns even more. You know, there's an obvious compromise here no one is talking about. Just give guns to fetuses. This way, they'll have a sporting chance of defending themselves. It's a perfect solution that all sides can agree is terrible. But guns can solve all sorts of problems. For example, South Carolina hasn't been able to execute an inmate on death row for 10 years because pharmaceutical companies have refused to sell states the drugs to carry out lethal injections. So the governor of South Carolina signed a bill requiring death row inmates to choose between firing squad or electric chair as their execution method, which is obviously shocking. I mean, since when have pharmaceutical companies refused to sell drugs to anyone? Oh, and I guess the firing squad thing is also a bit strange. The last time execution by firing squad was used in America was in Utah all the way back in, 2010. That was only 4 or 5 years ago? Personally, I think it's cruel and unusual to make inmates choose the method of their execution without giving them a dope and unusual choice, like execution via catapult into a volcano. Forget being in bed surrounded by loved ones. Volcano catapult is how I want to go. You might say, that's a waste of taxpayer money. And I would agree, but only if it isn't televised. Survivor Season 41 is going to be fire. Speaking of objects flying through the skies, Congress is set to be briefed on UFOs next month because apparently the U.S. has a massive intelligence failure. Former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence, Christopher Mellon, said, "It's extremely disturbing to think that after spending hundreds of billions of dollars for so many years and believing our airspace to be secure, in fact, we've had vehicles operating in restricted military airspace with impunity on a recurring and sustained basis for many years." Republicans are especially appalled at the possibility of aliens crossing through our atmosphere, since we already have so many aliens crossing our southern border. And there just isn't enough room for all of the space aliens at the Area 51 detention facility. The last thing we need is even more detained aliens for Kamala Harris to never visit. But there's good news. These UFOs probably aren't aliens after all. Some reports say that they're actually adversary drones that are spying on the US military. This is actually bad news. Never mind. But regardless of whether these UFOs are alien or not, it's clear that aliens have already landed on Earth. How else do you explain Mark Zuckerberg? The truth is out there, people. More after the break. Welcome back. California's state health director announced that despite the CDC's recommendations and despite more counties in California seeing COVID case improvements, citizens will still be required to wear masks indoors until June 15th. So California is still following the science. Only now they're saying, go ahead, science, we'll catch up with you later. We're just going to sit here for another month, just in case. This definitely won't fuel anti-maskers' assertions that it was never about science, but about control. I can't blame California too harshly, though, since even Dr. Fauci is still wearing a mask. Fauci said despite being fully vaccinated himself, he's still wearing a mask because he doesn't want to send mixed signals. He, of course, said this after he and the CDC said that fully vaccinated people don't have to wear masks. He probably should have said, I don't want to send any more mixed signals. Fauci's signals are so confusing, if he were a traffic light, this would be his intersection. Speaking of ongoing wrecks in our country, let's talk about Congress. There's a Democrat-backed proposal to create a commission to probe the U.S. Capitol attack on January 6th, and it's moving forward. The proposal passed the House this week, but it doesn't look likely to pass the Senate. If it did pass, the commission would be in the style of the 9/11 Commission, which investigated the terrorist attacks and made recommendations based on its findings. But if the 9/11 recommendations are anything to go by, then this January 6th commission will likely conclude Trump was behind the January 6th attack and recommend we respond by spending the next 20 years occupying Mitch McConnell's House. Maybe that's why this proposal is facing opposition from McConnell, as well as House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy. McCarthy said given the political misdirections that have marred this process, given the now duplicative and potentially counterproductive nature of this effort, and given the Speaker's short-sighted scope that does not examine interrelated forms of political violence in America, I cannot support this legislation. Boy, that sure is a fancy way of saying, if I support this, Donald Trump will dump me faster than Liz Cheney, and then I'll have no chance of becoming Speaker of the House if Republicans regain control in 2022. And forget insurrectionists. Conservatives are facing a much bigger threat to their way of life, namely woke capitalism. A conservative group launched a $1 million+ ad campaign this week attacking CEOs of American Airlines, Coca-Cola, and Nike by name. This ad campaign is in response to these companies speaking out against Republican-backed voting laws, which I've talked about before many times already. You know what? I'm glad they're pushing back. Because forget Israelis and Palestinians, the real victims this week are Republicans. I mean, has anyone thought about how Mitch McConnell is doing? Big business is being mean to him, and he loves big business. Poor Mitch. The companies targeted in these conservative ads very well may launch a counterattack in their own commercials in the future. And the saddest thing about that is, considering how often we get demonetized, we're probably not going to see a cent from it. Which is to say, the real victim here is us. More after the commercial break, which may or may not have a commercial. Welcome back. After 11 days of deadly fighting between Israel and Hamas-backed militants in Gaza, President Biden has ended it with a ceasefire. Okay, it was actually maybe Egypt that helped broker the deal. But Biden was involved. For example, he had bluntly told Prime Minister Netanyahu the violence needed to be stopped. But he did so privately. It comes after Biden had approved a $735 million weapons deal with Israel earlier this year, and also restored financial assistance for Palestinians. So the Biden administration funded both sides of the conflict, which is exactly why Joe Biden deserves credit for the ceasefire. If you give both sides the money to buy huge, deadly weapons, they'll have no choice but to sign a ceasefire to protect themselves from mutually assured destruction. Galaxy brain move, Biden. In slightly less controversial news, about 60% of Americans 18 and older have now had at least one dose of a COVID-19 vaccine. But some government officials think Americans need more incentives to get their shots. So Ohio implemented a lottery to encourage residents to get vaccinated. And it's working. Every week for 5 weeks, one vaccine recipient there will be drawn at random and win $1 million. After this lottery was announced, the state saw a 6% spike for residents aged 30 to 74 getting vaccinated. Since this idea was such a success, I say we should hold lotteries to convince people to do other things the majority wants them to do. Every week, the government should give away $1 million at random to people who pick up after their dog on the sidewalk, use their turn signals, cover their mouth while yawning, cover their mouth when sneezing, cover their mouth whenever they feel the urge to lecture someone about cryptocurrency, hold the door open for the person right behind them, don't say, "long story short," and then tell a 25-minute story. Don't take crying infants to R-rated movies. Don't take crying infants to movies in general. And don't decide they're qualified to run for office just because their parent was a politician. You know, that last example reminds me. Andrew Giuliani, son of former New York City Mayor Rudolph Giuliani, announced he would run for governor of New York State. Andrew Giuliani said, "I'm a politician out of the womb. It's in my DNA." That probably explains why in the maternity ward, he shook hands with and kissed all the other babies, and ordered airstrikes on everyone who stole his nose. Andrew Giuliani also added, New York deserves a leader who will fight to make it the greatest state in America once again. There's just one problem with that statement. New York was never the greatest state in America. That honor belongs to Delaware. Because when's the last time you heard anything from Delaware? Delaware minds its own business and stays out of trouble. You'd never hear about rats stealing pizzas in tent cities where people on bath salts bite each other's faces off in Delaware, because Delaware has its act together. That's what happens when you're a small state and a big tax haven. Andrew Giuliani described his potential matchup with Andrew Cuomo as the fight of the century, saying, Giuliani versus Cuomo, holy smokes, it's Muhammad Ali versus Joe Frazier. We can sell tickets at Madison Square Garden. Yeah, because after a year of not being able to attend sporting events, that's the battle New Yorkers really want to see. In the red corner, we have an anti-establishment member of the establishment who's never held office and whose only political experience comes through nepotism. And in the blue corner, we have a pathologically dishonest sexual harasser whose policies bankrupted small businesses and killed thousands of grandparents. New York State, let's get ready to crumble! It's absurd to call Giuliani versus Cuomo the fight of the century, when in this century, we've already seen King Kong versus Godzilla. That was a way better fight. And even if Kong versus Godzilla happened in Manhattan, it'd still be less disastrous for New York than Cuomo versus Giuliani. So what do you think about the stories we covered this week? Leave your comments below. And remember, America Uncovered is supported mainly by viewers. Be sure to visit patreon.com/AmericaUncovered. Contribute $1 or more per episode. We rely on your support to help us keep making great episodes. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. Thanks for watching America Uncovered.